like it when horrors aren't just traditional slashers, but instead make you think. The new Netflix Spanish horror, The Wasteland, plays with imagery and ideas to get under our skin. But is it effective? While taking refuge from war on a remote homestead, a couple and their young son are haunted by a terrifying entity, testing the ties that bond them. This is the quiet and slow burn of a horror. We meet the family that is center to the narrative, and really there are no other players in this. We follow Diego, his mom, and dad, and they live out in the middle of nowhere, escaping the horrors and upheaval of war. They live a simple existence, farming only what they need to survive. And we see Diego's dad trying to teach him some skills that he's going to need for survival, like how to prepare a rabbit for dinner. Now, understandably, Diego, who's pretty young, isn't too interested in learning to clean an animal for eating, and his mom is there to sort of rescue him from those types of tasks, instead showing him how to find which vegetables are fresh or getting him to help out with the laundry. Now, all around their property are these sort of scarecrow-looking features that they serve multiple purposes. I mean, one is to keep birds away from their food supply, but then secondly, and maybe more importantly, they serve as a warning and boundary for Diego. Outside those lines lie war, which means death and misery. We get the sense that the family lives in at least a low-level state of constant fear. They're wary of any that could come across their path, satisfied to just exist peacefully on their patch of land. The visuals for this are beautiful but unsettling. The house is just truly out in the middle of nowhere. We can't see any structures or signs of life anywhere that the camera pans outside of the family's home. And the whole production has a dusty tone and feel to it, helping to place us in the time period, but also to reinforce the setting. They don't live in a lush valley or huge forest. They're on some desolate plain that looks pretty foreboding and intimidating to try and survive on. The camera does a good job of putting us close to the family so that we can feel connected, but far enough to keep us a bit at arm's distance, making us question what we see and hear. As the story goes along, the isolation gets more and more intense, and the family gets more paranoid about the sounds they hear and the things that they may see. Diego believes at some point that a creature is looming out in the darkness, that the threat his parents have been so worried about coming isn't one of people, but is some malevolent beast intent on harm. I love how this complicates the story so well. Does Diego really see something? Or is it all in his imagination, spurred along by an ever-increasing depression and maybe even madness that his family is experiencing? The story does a wonderful job at examining isolation, loneliness, and fear, but doesn't spoon-feed us the concepts. The isolation and loneliness are evident just based on the setting and then through the behaviors that we get to witness. The fear develops slowly over time, but becomes very palpable for the characters. We can see the terror that builds, even if it's only in their imaginations. Now, I'm not saying one way or another if there is or isn't a beast, but the fear begins inside the minds and then manifests from there, wreaking all kinds of havoc in the family's lives. I mentioned this as a slow burn, and it's also a quiet film as well. Not that there isn't a score to it and we just sit in silence, but there are good portions of what we watch that have no dialogue. The characters emote and convey their contemplation through wordless actions rather than providing exposition on every single deed. There's a reliance on slow-mo shots that did get a little tiresome to me. Even though at times this was a great technique to employ, I just would have preferred less of it throughout the story. I can also see how this could be a turnoff for some. The slowness and quietness do require patience, but then this also isn't a traditional horror, which can be another notch against it. But I loved all of these things, and I love the aesthetic that is contained within the film. The quietness and patience actually work to increase the intensity of the themes. There's an unraveling that, while not scary, is terrifying in its own sense. And then I love how this affects familial relationships. There's a great deal of tension that is created by having the characters in a sequestered location with only themselves to rely on as they slowly sink into depression or madness. I mean, what's that Jack Torrance typed? All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy? It's kind of fitting here too. So overall, The Wasteland is a quiet but intense slow burn horror that uses the isolation and loneliness of the characters to drive the fear of the narrative. The cinematography is wonderfully executed, creating imagery that is daunting but beautiful, and the actors capture the emotions of their characters effectively, creating players that we can be drawn to and fearful of all at the same time. There's no sex or nudity, but there is some profanity and some violence. I give The Wasteland 4 out of 5 couches. Are there any good slow burn horrors you've seen lately? Let me know what you watched in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.